Welcome to the Future Christian Podcast, your source for insights and ideas on how to lead your church in the 21st century. At the Future Christian Podcast, we talk to pastors, authors, and other faith leaders for helpful advice and practical wisdom to help you and your community of faith walk boldly into the future. Whether you're a pastor, church leader, or a passionate member of your faith community, this podcast is designed to challenge, inspire, and equip you with the tools you need for impactful ministry. And now for a little bit about the guest for this episode.
Welcome to the Future Christian Podcast. Today, Loren Richmond Jr. is in conversation with Chad Brooks. Chad is an ordained elder in the United Methodist Church and currently serves on the staff of the Louisiana Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church as the congregational vitality strategist. He lives in central Louisiana with his wife of 20 years, Meredith. Chad is a graduate of Louisiana Tech University and Asbury Theological Seminary. Chad grew up in the church as the son of an SBC pastor and has spent his career working in all aspects of church, from technical production director of churches and a major seminary to a pastor of established churches and church plants. He has stewarded the productive pastor community for 20 years and is equally passionate about seeing revival as he is about resourcing pastors in all aspects of healthy ministry. When not reading and thinking about the church, he enjoys practicing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and being in the outdoors at his hunting camp. A reminder before we start today's conversation, please take a moment to subscribe to the podcast, leave a review, and share Future Christian with a friend. Connect with Loren, Martha, and Future Christian on Instagram. Shoot us an email at loren@resonatemediapro.com with comments, questions, or ideas for future episodes. We appreciate your voice in how we faithfully discern the future of the church.
All right, welcome to the Future Christian Podcast. This is Loren Richmond Jr., and I am pleased to be joined today by the Reverend Chad Brooks. Hello, and welcome to the show.
Hey, it's great to be on, man.
Yeah, looking forward to having this conversation recorded, I guess. I feel like we've had half this conversation before in the past, so hopefully we're going to share it with our listeners here.
It won't be just private. I hate when you have those fun private conversations and you're really wishing the microphones were around for it.
Right. Yeah. So let's begin with this. What part of the world are you coming from today? Tell us about your neck of the woods.
Yeah, so I live in central Louisiana, which is maybe the most un-Louisiana part of Louisiana. But I grew up here, was gone for 25 years, kind of lived other places in the South, spent a lot of time in North Louisiana, and moved back home a couple of years ago. And it's kind of weird. I'm 2 blocks from the elementary school I grew up with, a half mile from my mom and dad. But I'm here. Alexandria is a city that exists because something has to be in the middle. But it's handy for me in my day job. So it's a fun place. I'm a big fan of
Yeah. Talk about your spiritual journey, what that's looked like in the past and what that looks like today.
Yeah. So I grew up the son of a Southern Baptist mega church pastor. So, especially if you're in the deep South, I always call these churches, and I talk about it a little bit and other stuff I've done. There's always the big church down the street. And so I grew up in one of those, and it'd been a big church for 40 years. And I had a lot of folks that might have that story of, that growing up in like evangelical, large church pastor's kid, got some gnarly sides of that story. And I don't. My dad's awesome. He retired 2 years ago, had a great experience, fantastic church, tons of great people. And I didn't realize how unique that was until I went away to college at a small private Baptist college where my parents graduated from, and realized very quickly that I was not that Southern Baptist. Didn't realize growing up that the church I grew up with was not that Baptist either. And, so that kind of started this, I became this denominational mutt for a long time, cruising around, checking different stuff out, had a job actually in an SBC church as a youth pastor in my early 20s, and that really solidified the whole, okay, Chad, you were not Baptist. And around that time, I've always read. I'm a voracious reader, and I somehow stumbled across church history. When I was in college, I transferred to a state university, and I was a history major, and I took a history of the Christian church class. And I don't think I had ever heard anything about Christianity before like 1900.
Yeah.
And it threw me into the church fathers, the creeds, the great tradition, all of that. And that really started me down this exploratory path to finding something different that made more sense to me. And I discovered United Methodism. Really, I discovered John Wesley and found a lot of, I fell in love with Wesley, went to seminary as a Southern Baptist still, went to a predominantly Methodist school as a Southern Baptist, and quickly realized that one of the reasons I had such an affinity for Methodism was I pretty much had grown up a theological Wesleyan without knowing it. And one of the interesting things with my dad's church is the senior pastors of that church typically have very long tenures. And so my dad was on staff there for 40 something years, was a youth pastor for 20 years, and the senior pastor for 25 years. And the senior pastor he followed, I grew up fishing with him, hunting with him. I mean, he was like a second grandfather to me, was there for almost 30 years. And when dad retired, or when he retired, dad started taking got a lot of his books. And then, and when dad retired, the books of my dad's that I wanted were all the old books. Most of them he had taken from Big John. And I realized like the majority of them came from the Abingdon Publishing House, which was one of the old United Methodist publishing imprints.
Yeah.
And I started realizing, 20 years ago in seminary that I was actually a theological Wesleyan. But the longer I've gotten from there, I realized, oh no, this is the bedrock of this. Like I actually grew up, in this really weird Southern Baptist church that was a lot more Wesleyan. Like I never heard the word Calvinism until I was 19 years old.
Yeah.
And so a lot of my own just shape and structure, I tell people is I found United Methodism. It was almost like this adopted kid who finds his birth parents, but had great adoptive parents along the way. And so I've got a weird journey, into Methodism. But so much of it was really, and it's still today, I mean, very rooted in historical Christianity. That sort of piece. And so like my own practice is not like in the last, 5 or 10 years, I've really fell in love with the Episcopal tradition and the prayer book. My wife grew up Catholic and always says I'd make a really good Roman Catholic too. And so that's what's interesting is, my own shape and future in a lot of ways is always kind of looking backwards more, but looking in backwards in light of the future, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. And, why don't you share just briefly kind of about some of your professional experiences that we're certainly going to get into it here, and then like your current role.
Yeah. Yeah. So I got my first paycheck from a church when I was 20 years old. And so I've been in ministry, my entire adult life, ran the gamut, youth pastor at small Baptist church, worked on campus ministry staff for a while. When I was in seminary, I was the technical director of our chapel. I went to Asbury. And so for us, chapel was 500 or 600 students. And so managing the technical side of chapel, the PA system, all that. I ran our design team for chapel for several years, worked inside of a lot of special projects, under, Reverend J.D. Walt when he was there. And then I, left seminary and went into United Methodist itinerancy, served established churches. I church planted for 9 years. Got a chance to start a fantastic church, saw that through like the full phase of church planting from, being portable for several years, being semi-portable. We built a sanctuary during COVID, which was a horrible and great idea. Merged with a small, tiny little Methodist church, during that period as well. And, left a couple of years ago with just a call to something different. I spent a couple of years, inside in Methodism, what we call extension ministry, where I had my ordination. I was really not at a local church. I had a little preaching station church, 1/4 time that was really opened my eyes to a lot of fun stuff. And then 2 years ago, stepped into my current role as the congregational strategist for the Louisiana Conference United Methodist Church.
Yeah, thanks for sharing all that. I'm wondering, like, and this is kind of an off the cuff question a little bit. Like you mentioned, kind of being a theological mud and, you know, theological Wesleyan in your youth and your Baptist tradition either. Like, what are some elements that from your Baptist tradition, if any, you still find meaningful that you still incorporate into your spiritual life today? Like for me, like I still like carrying around and reading a King James Bible.
Well, we were NIV people, so
oh my goodness,
I never did King James. That's kind of part of it. I mean, like my dad's church was always seen not theologically, but just practically as kind of a more progressive, forward-thinking church. And so a lot of that, it's kind of what I said, like when I got around real Baptists, I was like, I'm not one of y'all. Like, what's going on here? I'll tell you, you know, I think that a couple of things, and they're not necessarily owned by that tradition, but, you know, the private devotion was a big thing growing up there that still carries today. That absolutely kind of hangs on. And then, just evangelism. Like I can never not focus about evangelism. That was just always right in front of things. And I've never left that behind.
Okay, I've got to ask this question, Chad, because it comes to mind on, like, I feel like I just keep seeing this again and again, and I'm wondering, like, do new mainliners, like folks who did not grow up in the mainline tradition, like, do they make the best mainliners? Does that make sense? Like,
yeah.
Like I had a guy on, hopefully I'm going to remember how to say his name, Drew Crowson, I think it is, Crowson. He's Episcopal, like you, grew up Southern Baptist. Now he's planting a church in Dallas, kind of big metro area. Oh, his episode will be a few episodes back. You know, I think about myself, if I can speak so highly of myself, and I'm just curious, like, there does seem to be a different kind of energy that folks like you and I who grew up outside of the tradition, I'm thinking of my good friend and colleague Dennis Sanders, who grew up outside of mainline Protestantism, and for whatever reason or another, found a home, sometimes, you know, most of the time in a mainline Protestant tradition, and seem to have a greater, I don't know, maybe this is too judgy, but have a real passion for the church because we found it to be a home, but we didn't, like you mentioned, like it was like your family that your long lost family.
Yeah. You know, I could think, so this might be an answer to the question. It might not be, but a few years ago when the whole, deconstruction bit really kind of took over the internet.
Yeah.
In the Christian sphere, I thought it was really interesting because, like, I went through some really, really gnarly stuff 20 years ago, that would probably be called deconstruction now.
Right.
And I had a lot of other friends that were deep in Southern Baptist land that had some of the same frustrations and same questions. And oddly enough, we're all mainline now. And I almost wonder if we're going to go like super evangelical, super Baptist on this, it's almost like we knew we didn't want to become backsliders.
Right.
To use that term.
Right.
And instead we found a home that answered those questions. And so that's a very evangelical loaded statement. But yeah. I spent a lot of time, you know, at Asbury with weird Baptists and Pentecostals that were considering not just mainline, but I mean, a lot of these folks, oddly enough, the ones that grew up Pentecostal all either became Roman Catholic or Eastern Orthodox.
Wow.
And so I do feel like maybe that fierce allegiance and belief in the local church that you really don't see inside of the mainline as much might be something that's brought to the table.
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
Yeah. It's funny you use the word backsliding. That's certainly a word that someone who did not grow up Baptist probably is, what are you talking about?
Yeah. There's that great Toadies song, Backslider. Are you old enough to remember the Toadies?
No.
Oh, yeah. The Toadies have a song called Backslider, and the singer of the Toadies was a preacher's kid that did not stay in the church. But
well, see, that's probably why I'd not heard of it, because I was too Baptist to not to probably listen to the Toadies.
I also think I'm a little bit older than you. It might have been. They were kind of like a two-hit wonder in the mid '90s. So,
Chad, I often lament. I think I say this sometimes, half serious and half true. Like, I think I deconstructed, like you said, like 15, 20 years too soon. I would have been social media star here. Anyway, we're not here to talk about, mainliners or former Baptists or deconstruction. As interesting as it is, I want to talk to Chad about his book, Is My Church Healthy? And I think, Chad, we first kind of encountered one another's work on Substack.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, this is great. I'm so thrilled to see, as someone who's kind of like we talked about, brings that passion and energy and evangelism in a mainline tradition. And I was thrilled to see it, in another mainline tradition. And, so thrilled to see your work in new church and church revitalization. So let's just you've already kind of talked a little bit about, your current role, but talk about how your role and your work with churches led to putting some stuff down on paper and into a book.
Yeah. So, I mean, it kind of actually goes hand in hand, because one of the reasons I decided to write the book, and then the books that I'm writing right now, initially because we realized, like, we go into work in these churches here in Louisiana, this 90-page book is actually saving me like 3 meetings.
Huh.
And we were looking at just the cost of like I realized that, it's on Amazon. People can buy it on Amazon, but I realized, like, if I publish this through Amazon self-publishing, I can get author copies for like $2, and I can just send this to these churches in Louisiana for dirt cheap before we start our work together. Because what Is My Church Healthy is about is really our first meeting, the first conversation we have with anybody. And where it came from is when I got hired, most United Methodist annual conferences, used to have a role called the congregational developer. That was the old job title in the 90s and 2000s. And when I got hired, they decided to retitle our office and retitle my role as congregational vitality strategist. And I went into my boss about 2 months into the job and said, I've got a problem with this word vital, because this isn't what we have to focus on right now. Like, our churches are actually very unstable. And so we need to think about what it means to bring a church to stability, because this is post-COVID. And if you're familiar with United Methodist Church, this is post-disaffiliation 2023.
Right.
I mean, I got hired. I started the job 6 months after the final vote for exiting churches in the Louisiana Conference. And I've got an awesome boss, Dr. Van Stenson, and he was like, I'm intrigued. Chase the rabbit, run the line. And so what it came up with is, the history of the word vital and Methodism that comes from this report. I talk about it in my book that came out in 2011, where people were trying to study healthy churches. And it was so controversial, it actually got torpedoed at the 2012 General Conference.
Wow.
So one of our giant governing bodies, the denomination, did this amazing resource project that was so threatening and scary, people torpedoed it. And when I was coaching, I was working for a company that had developed a pastoral assessment and coaching program that was based off of information from that report on what the qualities of a pastor of a vital church were. And so I knew that, that language was really effective and really helpful. So I went back into the studies, what they said about the actual churches. And so we came up with, there's really 4 stages of church. There's an unstable church, a stable church, a vital church, or a sustainable church. And that, churches are going to fall inside of that. And then alongside of those, we really began developing 7 core categories of of these churches based off what we were seeing and what we were hearing from the churches in Louisiana and where they were having problems. And the big thing for me was we have to be able to measure all these things. I'm a measurement and data nerd.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to find a way to measure these things, but also make it to where congregations can kind of self-select relatively easily where they feel like they might be at. And the 7 core categories of member care and relationships, objective metric measurements, financial health, ministry opportunities, new member integration, evangelism, and then congregational engagement. And so we kind of created this big, huge grid of how a church would manifest all 7 of those core categories alongside of the stages, the unstable, stable, vital, sustainable. And we created a 1-page grid. And we loved it. So we walk into a church, hand them the 1-page grid, and their leadership can circle like, okay, we feel like this is present here at our church, this kind of stuff. And so the part of the book was really like, hey, let's just speed up our work so we can, better resource our churches. And, it's fantastic, to see this work out. The whole thing, actually, I kind of seeded the content out on an email list I have, just walking through each of the 7 core categories. And I was getting feedback back and forth from people on the email list. And that's when I realized, like, okay, this might be helpful because it really is, it's just that question. Like, is my church healthy? Typically, healthy churches aren't going to ask that question.
Right.
Churches that are worried about things are going to ask that question. Right. And what I appreciated is vitality does not exist on a linear spectrum.
Right.
Church can fall all over this grid. I mean, I've seen some really, really unhealthy churches absolutely like justify being in the sustainable category for one of those core categories. And so it so much of how I do development, and with not just this book, but the books we got coming out later on in the year, it's about eliminating the anxiety behind people knowing that they have stuff to work on. And let's get to kind of tangible, tactical things that are easy to do. And if somebody's familiar with the adaptive technical paradigm, is break this down into technical skills. Because 9 times out of 10, getting from unstable to stable is absolutely technical. It doesn't, you don't have to hit the tough stuff necessarily.
Yeah. I think what was most interesting to me about your matrix is that I think most people would just automatically assume like a big church is a great church, is a healthy church. And a small church is not a healthy church.
Yeah.
Talk through how your matrix kind of flips those narratives.
Yeah. So that's a passion of mine. The last church I served at, my little tiny preaching assignment, quarter-time appointment, like 17 people on a Sunday morning, would score pretty well on the vitality matrix. Now the congregational engagement and the evangelism stuff, like, they're not doing very good at that. Like, they had 4 years of money in the bank. And, you might say a church of 16 or 18 people isn't that effective. Well, they're in a municipality of like 1,500 people.
Yeah.
So like in the book, I talk a little bit about missional saturation. Like, their missional saturation number was higher than average for Louisiana. Whereas like I had and I doubt anybody's going to hear it from there, but like I had an incident at my dad's church 2 years ago where I showed up to a men's ministry event that was going to be like a multi-week thing. And, I signed up, paid my $20. Nobody knew who I was. So I've not been here in 25 years. Gave him my phone number for text messages, all this kind of stuff. And I never showed up again because it was at 5:00 on Friday mornings. And I'm not going to do that. And I never heard back. Like, never heard anything. And I was like, wow, like, y'all are a really, really big church. But I mean, apparently y'all's new person systems aren't good enough to catch, hey, why this person, I mean, there's 300 guys there. I mean, this is larger than 95% of the Methodist churches in Louisiana.
Right.
And so, at other times, like I've got a church I'm working with some right now that 20 years ago was 1,800 people and it's now like 70. And so it really, I mean, you can have a really, really healthy small church, terribly, and we're not talking about morals or anything like that. We're talking about just operations.
Right.
It can be really unhealthy. And I think with the bigger churches, especially, one of the big issues is, like, I've got this kind of quick description. I say, so there's 3 kinds of churches that grow. There's the big church down the street. There's the intentionally evangelistic church, and there's the church that has to grow or it's going to die. One of the difficulties of the big church down the street is just the churn. I mean, they're going to see, they're a tractor beam for the community. They see so many new people, they can actually do a really bad job at integration.
Right.
But just the law of ratios is going to keep them ahead of the curve, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it really is, it's not healthy, has nothing to do with size. But there's things that you can measure to understand this. I'll talk about.
Yeah, I'm glad you make that point about the three kind of churches that will grow. Yeah, I think it was Gary McIntosh have you read him? He talks about like, this has been a number of years ago, but he talks similar, like a church, like based on its ratio against versus like other churches in the society are like going to have that much bigger of a magnetism.
Yes.
So it's like you say, like folks are going to keep coming just because of the gravitational pull to some churches.
Right. Some of I understand some of that because the town I pastored in for almost 15 years in North Louisiana, Monroe, West Monroe, most people would recognize it because Duck Dynasty was in West Monroe.
Oh,
yeah. Well, we'll make the same noises. But like the population of those two cities combined is like 65,000. But West Monroe, the other side of the river than I ever lived, 15,000, 20,000. And they had probably 3 or 4 churches that averaged over 1,500 on a Sunday morning.
Wow.
I mean, the religious landscape of that area is really interesting. And you got this magnetism, like that, certain churches they get to a point where they're just a tractor beam for people who randomly decide, I'm going to start going to church. Well, I'm going to go to the giant one I drive by all the time that has billboards all over town, just name recognition. That's a very real thing. And, I talk about what I call hard edge churches versus soft edge churches. And, that large churches are typically pretty hard edged. You're going to get the same experience at 2 or 3 of them that you're going to get anywhere else. They're going to sing the same songs. They're reading the same people. They all have, like, they all have the big signs out front. Hey, great to see you here. It's generic, not a negative sense, but like it's fairly generic.
Right.
And those types of those churches, as hard edge churches like that, it can be really difficult if you're in a solid, smaller local church and you're struggling because, you're just wondering where are people and why aren't they coming to our church? And it has nothing to do with you being good or bad at stuff.
I think this gets into another point you make in the book that I thought was excellent. Let's see if I can find the quote here. You talk about critical mass. You say critical mass is having the right size of people for your ministry, approach to be useful and compelling. Attempting to be too big of a ministry is awkward and exhausting. Leverage your normal sized church. Leverage your normal sized church attributes. So if you have 5, 7 children, don't make an entire wing and said, what is the appropriate ministry we can do with 5, 7 children that might not get done in a larger setting? Because it goes back to this point about that magnetism of the big church. Like small churches, I'm sure you've seen this like I have. It's like, oh, we need to replicate what they have. And you say make sure your ministry is right sized to your ministry context.
Yeah. So I think that we have this tension point that if all churches are saying, and I love how we're pulling into this piece, they're going to think, okay, we can't have youth ministry unless we have the same type of youth ministry that the big church down the street does. But, you don't have the resources and the ability to do that. But then also, you might be able to do things that big church down the street would love to be able to do in a relational level and a relational dynamic. And to miss that is missing a huge opportunity. So instead, you need to scale up. Like, hey, I got to talk about percentage based metrics a lot in the book. Is hey, we're a church of 30. Having 5 middle school and high schoolers in a church of 30 is actually a really solid number. So what do we do to have great ministry for 5 middle or high schoolers, rather than feeling like we're doing a bad job because we don't have 70 that the church down the street has, but the church that has 70 down the street is running like 600 on Sunday morning. And at that size, 70 might not even be the healthiest thing for them.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I'm glad you put that in the book. I think this gets to another point of being an awareness of your data. You write about how it's impersonal not to track data, which again, I think maybe in my neck of the woods, this is, something that mainliners are more comfortable with in your neck of the woods. But talk about why tracking data on people is helpful and meaningful, really.
Yeah. So, I'm noticing that data is this thing that, we don't talk about it enough. And when we do talk about it, we feel really icky about it. And in some ways, I think the way that the mainline church deals with data, it might be indicative of the larger decline that we have experienced over the last 30 or 40 years. And I kind of make this tongue-in-cheek joke about it to explain, what happened is, if you're Catholic, you want people to know that you're not Protestant. And if you're in the main line, you often want people to know you're not Baptist. And if you're Baptist, you want people to know you're not Pentecostal. And if you're Pentecostal, you want everybody to know you are Pentecostal. And I've been in all four of those kinds of churches, so I can say that. But anyway, I
think the only way it's changed now is mainliners want people to know they're not evangelical.
Yeah. So, and I'm in the deep South. So when you say Baptist, everybody knows you're talking about. But
okay,
I've shared that with folks in different parts of the country. They say that exact same thing. When in reality, there are theological differences between those four spectrums.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as the congregations operationally are organized in a healthy way, that's not a theological issue. And I do feel like there's a lot of stuff that the main line just missed in the last 10 or 15 years that we don't do because that's what the Baptists or the evangelicals do. I was digging around earlier today. I was going through, I found this tiny little green 3x5 index card that was put out by the Methodist Church. So 1939 to 1968. And it was literally like you could order a block of 1,000 of these things and create a 3x5 index card church database.
Wow.
And I've cleaned out a lot of closed churches. Whenever I go into a church, I've never seen this before. And one of the things I talk about in the book a lot, is like, you need a church database. You need a modern church database because it is a ministry tool. And the amount of larger mainline churches. So in the mainline, a church of 200 is considered a large church. They really don't have anything. Like, it blows my mind. And I get that numbers are icky and people are trying to make this case. And I saved 2 articles this morning from people talking about how to, why does Sunday morning attendance matter or anything? And we're still inside. Hey, those are people. Like, Jesus calls us to go reach people. We need to be good stewards of what we have been given. And if we're not really good stewards of people, there might be, there's complications that are there. And then also something I didn't talk about in the book that much. I'm talking about a lot in my next book is, for me, Sunday morning worship attendance is not the end all be all metric. But what it's very helpful for is, if you imagine back into old cartoons, you had the old timey surveyors who like pounded a big stake in the ground and then pulled the chain off to measure against. For me, there's no better measurement stake than Sunday morning worship attendance. And it's helpful to have that, to understand, how are you doing in your discipleship ministries? Like I talk about in the book a lot, like, what are healthy percentages based on your church? It's like I talked about earlier, like, for a church of 35 middle school and high schoolers is a solid number to have, measuring those sorts of things. And so I think ultimately we have to care about people. And if we care about our churches, this isn't about, bragging rights or anything. It's about sustainability.
Right.
Like, you have to have people in the church to keep the building open. And a lot of the thrust of this book and the conversations I've had with people about it is, like, this book is written for people that are nervous their church is about to have to close. And what can we do to get you stable? I really don't talk that much in the book about moving from stable to vital, or hardly at all from vitals to sustainable. Like, I really try to focus the book of what does it mean to move from unstable to stable.
Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit through that a little bit here? Just what are some of those first key steps from moving from stable to, or I'm sorry, I'm saying it backwards. Say it, how you say it again?
Yeah. To move from unstable to stable. Yeah.
Yes.
So with the book, like, this is a resourcing thing for me. I'm passionate about resourcing pastors. I give away a pretty, solid amount of, some free digital tools when you get the book. You can get, your own, one page, pass the sheet out, sit down with your leadership and say, hey, just kind of curious, like, where does this go? Look through the one page sheet. I offer a more complicated solution to it that I honestly think is too complicated. Just go for the one page solution, do the one page thing. 9 times out of 10, what I find is a couple of things. One, very rarely are these churches, so the objective metric measurements, like, they're not doing that at all. Like, just that's going to have to help you establish a baseline. You want to understand a baseline. I also give away an Excel spreadsheet that's a metric calculator that has a lot of these percentage pieces built in. So, hey, let's fill in our Sunday attendance. Let's fill in how many visitors do we have this month? How many kids do we have? How many youth? How many adults in discipleship? How many people serving? How many people giving? And it spits out automatically for you those percentages. I've never worked with a church that's struggling that's in the vital or sustainable category for metric measurement. And very rarely are they even in the stable category. And so I think that is just, so it kind of circles back with the last piece. Like, what do we do about data? It's like, this is the beginning point, because it helps you set goals and to keep goal setting instead of a percentage based thing. I also think congregational engagement, that first core category, and it's almost like a cousin with the ministry opportunities as well, because that's where the discipleship stuff really goes into it. Is a lot of churches, and I found it mainline churches, and this might be another one of those, hey, we're not evangelical, is, discipleship and relationships are huge. And a lot of times what I'm finding out is even the internal piece of the church is not doing that well for those who are not maybe in the immediate, like, first couple of circles of involvement. So outside of your, like, leadership team and the people that are there every single Sunday, no matter what, a lot of times that outer edge is there barely. I think I talk about in the book how we found in Louisiana, so many of our churches are actually significantly larger than they are on Sunday morning. And it's that gap between, like the little last church I served. I learned so much of that church is built into these books I'm writing right now. They ran 18 or 19 on Sunday morning, I think, when I was there. And I did kind of like a really analog idea of capturing their active adults. And there's over 40. And I was like, y'all, half of the church is not actually that active in the church.
Yeah.
Like, we could grow our attendance. Like, we could beat where they were in 2019 if we just engage the people that already call this their church.
Right.
And so that's the stuff I think is really, that's what I see changes the most. Cause, like, you get that kind of stuff under control, a lot of times your financial reality is going to begin increasing. People are going to be excited about what's going on at the church. They're going to start inviting their friends. You're going to have to figure out what to do with new people because new people are coming. It's really that core category of, the member care and relationships, congregational engagement, objective metric measurements that seem to be the biggest game changers.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. Again, I'm thinking, I think this was Tom Rainier, or maybe he just says it, someone else says it, like, it's the cliche, like, what you measure grows, right?
Yeah. Yeah, there's so many versions of that. Yeah.
Right. So I think it's important just to have some sense of what you're keeping track of. So I'm glad you're mentioning that.
And with that, if you're not measuring anything, then nothing's probably growing.
Right.
Because, I mean, I don't know, like, so you were part of the DOC for a long time, right?
Right.
Y'all had to submit an annual report, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of times in the main line, most people don't look at these numbers until they do their yearly report.
Right.
Then
I could see that.
And then depending on your structure, you don't have an easy way to pull out multiple years of those same things. The United Methodist Church has a tool called umdata.org, and it's not been updated in a couple of years. It takes a few years to get updated. But you can find out a handful of key information points on every single United Methodist Church in the country. I've not found one of those for other mainline denominations. I've looked for them, but I've not found them.
Yeah. The Episcopal Church has really good data, I think. The UCC, I think, has been pretty good about data keeping, but I know like the DOC, we're using a lot of like slang here for our non-mainline friends.
Yeah.
But the DOC has not been great about data collection historically.
And what I've seen is, a lot of the mainline's good at keeping this stuff, but for any random person to access it in an accessible way and to pull back.
Oh, sure.
That's what you can't find. And a lot of our churches don't even realize, hey, let's look at our worship attendance for the last 10 years. Like, what can we tell?
Right.
Let's look at Sunday school attendance. Like, that's the thing. It's not necessarily worship. Let's look at Sunday school. Let's look at giving units. Like these sort of data points. And let's look at these and not just look at them in a 10-year pullback, but hey, let's look at these things every month and realize when we might have a problem 45 days after the problem happened, not 10 months or 5 years.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause even doing like a 10-year survey of giving and attendance and some of those more basic metrics, you can be like, cause I think what often happens, right, Chad, you've probably seen this, is like, you lose a few people last year and the year before and the year before. And, what was a congregation, it's like the Baptist church that I grew up in, right, was when I was a teenager, like 120, 125, like the kind of classic mid-sized church. And now it's like 60, 65, and it's nothing like dramatic. It's just kind of this slow, lose a few people here and there. And if you're not really paying attention, it's like, whoa, what happened? But if you don't look at that, it's just kind of like, oh yeah, we're smaller than we used to be, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, COVID. Yeah. COVID happened. As a data nerd, COVID's actually fascinating to me because it was a giant reset button for every church in the country.
Mm-hmm.
But also just, realizing what does it mean to be able to accurately kind of say where you're at. Doesn't seem, and then also like one of the things like you just brought up, like, now I have like a fourth layer down from this that we use in Louisiana. We'll go, okay, how many, because we have to report all this. I can find it. I don't have to call a pastor to get this information. I can get it in our yearly reports. Okay, how many deaths do they have? Okay, well, hey, your worship declined by 12 people last year, but the pastor buried 20 people.
Right.
So learning to look at those third and fourth layer things really, really matters a lot. If you're in this situation, you're trying to get a clear picture of what's actually going on.
Hey, I'm glad you brought up the deaths, because that's one, like, again, like, you could be working your butt off, being very intentional about evangelism, to use your word, but if you're not, if you're burying, like you said, 20, 30 people a year, like, that's a hard,
Yeah. Yeah. And is me as a denominational officer now, I feel like it's my responsibility to beat that drum when other people start asking, like, yeah, okay, yeah, they declined. Let's look at how many deaths they had.
Mm-hmm.
Because like we've got a church in our conference that's doing fantastic that, even before COVID was declining pretty significantly. But you look how many funerals they had a year. And then you look how many new members they took in. And they were always outpaced. They could never outpace the deaths with new members. And we're talking a church that dealt with a lot of these every year. And what's so interesting is, I saw Ryan Berge do something similar with one of the Lutheran denominations, but I started tracking, for churches that I knew had been declining prior to COVID. I tracked their average decline rate from like 2013 or 14 to 2020 and came up with an aggregate, like they were declining 8% a year. And so I ran looking at their 2019 attendance. Okay, let's do an 8% decline all the way to 2024. And then I made another curve of their actual attendance starting in 2020. And what's so funny is I'm finding a handful of churches that the COVID reset actually helped the church, and they are larger now than where they statistically might have been if they continue the same.
Interesting. Yeah. Interesting. COVID really was a turning point here for so many churches, in some good and bad ways, I suppose. I do want to ask you before we take a break. This is kind of off topic, but you talk about it briefly in the book, and I feel like it's such an interesting thing that I want to hear more about. You talk about ministries of mercy and justice versus ministries of mission and evangelism in mainline churches. So do you want to talk a little bit about that here?
Yeah, I'll try to do it a little bit. So really what that came from was me thinking we've kind of, we use all four of those words almost for the same thing sometimes. Or like I'll have churches say, hey, we do tons of ministries of mercy and justice, but nobody ever comes to church. And you'll have sometimes well-meaning, more seasoned saints like, let's shut down the food pantry because none of those folks ever come to church. And so we have this weird like put together of all of them. And what I've been thinking about a lot lately, and a lot of this comes from the work of Leslie Newbegin, is this idea that, the mission of the church is the very distinct call we're given in Matthew 28. Like this is what we are called to do. And that evangelism, mercy, and justice are all three separate enterprises in relationship to the expanding kingdom of God. And that we perhaps need to think of all four of those as separate things again inside of their specific place. So like I think I have a quote in the book, don't be a community center, be a church. Like you're a church. I used to have a mentor pastor that would always say, this was a very justice oriented church in a really bad neighborhood in a major city. We had tons of this kind of stuff, but he'd always say, y'all remember the Church of Satan can have a coat drive.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like, hey, no, be the church. Like you're different. You're the only uniquely different entity inside of humanity.
Well, this is good conversation. Let's take a quick break. The book is, again, Is Your Church Healthy? So I guess you can get it on Amazon, right?
Yep. It's the only place it's available is Amazon. So yeah.
Only place it's available. Okay. I guess I'm kind of out of order here. Let's plug that later. But my kid is, if you can't tell, hungry.
Bagel.
And
a bagel pretty bad.
He wants a bagel. Let's take a quick break and we'll come back with some closing questions. All right, we're back with Reverend Chad Brooks. And Chad, some closing questions. You can take these as seriously or not as you'd like to. If you're Pope for a day, what does that day look like for you?
Okay, that was a wild one, man. I like that. So I'm going to pretend that I am a theological Wesleyan Pope.
Okay.
Methodism took the class meetings out of the requirements and measurements for a local church in the 1930s. The band meetings never really kicked on that hard in America. That was a British phenomenon. I would put the band and the class meetings back at the forefront of the operation of the church.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. How about this? A theologian or historical Christian figure you'd want to meet or bring back to life?
I would love to sit down and meet A.W. Tozer. Because the further I get away from my 20s, the more I realize how much of a theological influence he was on my life. I'm also fully expected that he would chastise me deeply about things, but I would still, he seemed to bridge the gap between so many different theological spectrums. You couldn't pick him down as a Calvinist or an Arminianist. He wasn't evangelical. He wasn't fundamentalist. He wasn't in that kind of era when a classic liberal. I mean, you couldn't peg the guy down. I continue to read him like crazy, find sermons, that kind of stuff. I would love to have a sit down with A.W. Tozer.
That's good. What do you think history will remember from our current time and place?
I think that at this point, I think what's important, because I know I love how your emphasis on the future church. I think that if we look at all of the issues of the last, 20, 30 years, that we have a little bit of false pride that we are the end all be all of things. And I think that what the future I think will remember about us is that we're actually on the cusp of something that's probably going to take a couple of 100 years to sort out.
Yeah.
And that we are still in the infancy stages of how people are going to talk about that era. And I try to remember that, to not get too, spun up over things, and to try to always be, very generous, and to be able to live in multiple places with multiple groups of people and that sort of thing. Thinking that, like, I don't want to be arrogant and feel like I'm going to figure everything out. That this is just the beginning of something that will take a very long time to sort out.
Yeah, that's a good answer. I appreciate that. What are your hopes for the future of Christianity?
I think it's important for us to realize that we are always called to be at the margins, and that, the last few hundred years, of Christendom was really this attempt to put Christianity as like the governing dynamic of the entire Western social order. I'm a big Charles Taylor fan, and we just look at how post-Reformation, or really before the Reformation, but especially post-Reformation, like the various strains of church were trying to do civic work. We have to deal with that tension, it not being at the center of all things. I talked about the last one. Big Augustine fan, City of God. The book that made me fall in love with City of God was a weird Baptist from Baylor about 20 years ago named Barry Harvey, wrote a book called Another City that really goes into that stuff as well. I think we also, and this might be kind of a combination of both these last two questions. It's been almost 1,000 years since the center of world Christianity has not been in the West.
Yeah.
And for us to, back that kind of arrogant piece, it's like, hey, the global Pentecostal movement, South America, and Africa, and Asia is doing, massive things. I think I'm not a missiologist, but friends that are, and I think I want to say, I heard even one of them say, like, for the first time also, we don't have just one global center of Christianity. We've got several of them, and none of them are white. None of them are in the West or in the Western, in the Northern Hemisphere. You got some that are down in South America. I just think it's important for us to realize that we're not the end all be all, and that, the hopes of the future church is that we become comfortable at the margins again, because we realize that's what we're called to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this is great. I really appreciate your conversation, your perspectives. Share how, I kind of blew it already, but share how folks can connect with you, get a copy of the book, all that.
So you can get the book. It's on Amazon. It's the only place it is. Did it through Amazon KDP Publishing, which, sidebar, I think everybody should self-publish right now. I love it. You need to do it.
I feel like we should have talked about that for the episode, but
we can do that. But later on. But I'm everywhere at Rev Chad Brooks. So all the socials, if I have an account that's under at Rev Chad Brooks, I really don't do this kind of stuff on Facebook. But Twitter or Substack, I will have this kind of conversation with folks all day long. I really badly manage revchadbrooks.com. Like, it's there, but it's not as good as it should be. And so, find me on Twitter, find me on Substack, or YouTube at Rev Chad Brooks.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate the conversation. Want to recommend the book to folks. And, I really think like your tool is a really helpful tool for churches to consider and evaluate themselves from. I think like you said, many churches are going to be pleasantly surprised where they land and find some real opportunities for themselves in a way that's sustainable and practical. So thanks for the conversation.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate the book.
And I will say this, it's the first of 4 that are coming out in the next year. that are all in the same vein. I'm finishing up the rough draft on the next one, probably in the next week and a half, and it's called Establishing a Growth Game Plan. And so
Awesome.
I kind of live and breathe normal sized church health. And so,
Hey, we'll have to do it again then.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we always leave folks with a word of peace. So may God's peace be with you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for joining us on the Future Christian Podcast. The Future Christian Podcast is produced by Resonate Media. We love to hear from our listeners with questions, comments, and ideas for future episodes. Visit our website at future-christian.com and find the Connect with Us form at the bottom of the page to get in touch with Martha or Loren. But before you go, do us a favor. Subscribe to the pod to leave a review. It really helps us get this out to more people. Thanks, and go in peace.